There can be many concerns with incentives. This video presents 3 that are nice extensions of the optimal piece rate model. One concern with incentives is pushing self-interest to extremes. Nielsen calls this motivating the wrong behavior. I call it overstimulation because it's pushing people in the direction that you want, but it's pushing them too far, or their self-interest is causing them to take the behavior too far. So one example comes from Lincoln Electric, where Lincoln Electric paid a piece rate for data entry. They're pretty much just counting keystrokes. And so if self-interested employees realize that they're being paid just per keystroke, irregardless of quality, then they can just pound on the keyboard mindlessly or during lunch, right? Or even if not quite so mindlessly, at least not paying as careful attention as you would be if quality was important, right? And so they're doing behavior you want them to. They're doing data entry, except their own self-interest is causing them to push it to an extreme and just bang on the keyboard all day, sort of mindlessly. Other examples include if a software company pays programmers to find bugs, oh, lo and behold, they might be finding bugs because they planted them there and made it easy for themselves to find. And hey, look what I found, give me my reward for finding this bug, even though their self-interest pushed them to program it in there in the first place, put it in there in the first place, make it easy to find. So let's think about how we can handle this in our simple optimal piece rate setup. And so, if we go back to this graph, this is dollars per effort on the y-axis. So this is going to be a marginal setup, and we have units of effort or quantity on the x-axis. And so then, the typical setup here for piece rates, we have the marginal net revenue curve in yellow is declining. We have the marginal cost of effort in red increasing, right? And we use this setup to find the optimal piece rate of B star. Now, in a case where there's overstimulation, think about it this way. In the first period, whether it's a week, a month, whatever the case may be, employees are responding to this incentive and doing what the organization wants. But over time, the employees figure out, hey, wait a minute, they're just monitoring keystrokes, or it's easy for me to program in bugs. And so essentially over time, we'll just call it period 2, but over time, the employees are finding sort of a cheaper way of exerting this effort. And so if employees are finding a cheaper way of exerting this effort, that's equivalent to their marginal cost decreasing. And so if their marginal cost decreases, then at the current levels of effort or the initial level of effort, the benefit of their effort is greater than the cost. When the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost, you have an incentive to do more, and so employees are predicted to increase their effort. And remember, it's not where the marginal net revenue curve intersects the new marginal cost of effort curve, because the marginal benefit to the worker is B star, the piece rate. That's how much they're going to get from each additional unit of effort. And so the new optimal amount of effort for the employee, E2, is where B star intersects the new marginal cost of effort. And so that's a problem for the organization, because notice at that point the organization is worse off, because from the organization's perspective, not the worker's perspective, but from the organization's perspective, the marginal cost of effort that the employee is exerting is greater than the marginal net revenue. But wait, it can actually be worse than this, because think of the employee who's just mindlessly typing on the keyboard. That effort, not only has the employee found a way of reducing the cost of that effort, but that effort is low quality. And so we shouldn't think that the marginal net revenue from that effort is the same level as before, right? That effort is lousy, there's lots of mistakes, somebody might have to go back in and rework it, or if you're selling something to another organization, there's going to be more returns or bad reputation, right? So there's going to be additional costs to the organization in the form of lower marginal net revenue. So this problem can actually be worse because the substandard effort might reduce marginal net revenue. And so notice that the actual loss to the organization is even greater because it's the difference between this marginal cost at B star from the organization's perspective, and this lower marginal net revenue. So again, one concern with incentives is that it might push an economically oriented worker, one who's very aggressively self-interested, to do extreme behaviors in terms of the types of things you're incentivizing, right? So the workers might be overstimulated, exert too much effort. Second concern with incentives is teams. So the situation we're thinking about here is we have an individual who has individual-based performance pay, and what might happen when we put that person into a team environment where instead of there being an individual incentive, there's now a team incentive. So our output is pooled, and then the reward is based on the team output rather than individual output. So as a reminder, here's the individual starting point. When I'm thinking about this as an individual worker, I'm bearing the full cost of my additional effort, but I'm going to receive the full benefit of that individual effort. And so an economically oriented individual is predicted to exert effort up to the point where the marginal cost of their effort equals the marginal benefit of their effort. But now let's place Homo economicus into a team where, again, the output is being pooled and the incentive is being based off of the pooled or team-based output. In that case, right, I am still bearing the full cost of my own effort, right? It's my own stress, it's my own additional exertion, my own headaches, whatever the case may be. So I'm bearing the full cost of my additional effort. However, I might be concerned that I'm not going to get back the full benefit of my effort because my effort is being pooled with others, and so the results of my effort are going to be shared with others. Now, in an extreme case, if I don't expect anybody else on the team to be doing anything, then the marginal benefit of my own effort would actually just be 1 over n of my marginal benefit, right? I'd be dividing it n ways if there's n people on a team. And so in this case, right, this very self-interested, economically oriented worker is only predicted to exert effort up to the point where marginal cost equals marginal benefit over n, right? Something less than the amount that they would have exerted when they're receiving an individual-based incentive. Now, dividing this by n is a pretty extreme case, right? That's where I'm not expecting my teammates to do anything or hardly anything. And again, that's pretty extreme, but the bigger point here is that if an economically oriented worker has some concern that the teammates aren't going to exert their full level of effort equal to what they would have as individuals, then I'm only going to receive part of my marginal benefit back because, again, my marginal benefit is being shared with others, but they're not working as hard as I am, so I'm not getting the same share of their benefit in return. Again, it doesn't have to be divided by n, but as long as there's some expectation or some nervousness that my teammates aren't going to work as hard as I am, then I'm not going to get the full benefit of my own effort, and so Homo economicus would be predicted to work not as hard as they would when they have an individual-based incentive. We can also see it in this graph here, right? Some expectation that I'm not going to get full benefit of my effort is equivalent to thinking about right, the team-based incentive or the team-based performance-based pay, team-based piece rate, BT for team, right, as being less than when I have an individual incentive. And so, of course, using this diagram, we can again easily see how an economically oriented worker who sees their incentive as lower or weakened because they're on a team and having to share their benefit with others who might not be working as hard as they are, right, they're predicted to work less hard. And so this, is the well-known free rider problem. It stems from nervousness that others are going to free ride, but notice it becomes sort of this self-reinforcing cycle where that causes me to be somewhat of a free rider. I'm not going to work as hard as I would have as an individual, and of course if others are looking at me, right, this causes them to be a free rider, and then the cycle just continues. Some economists might call this the 1 over n problem because my benefit is being shared n ways. But again, we don't have to think about it in such an extreme case. We just need to think about situations where an economically oriented worker is nervous that their teammates won't be working as hard as they would have as individuals, and that's going to cause people to be a free rider. And so we could think of different solutions. Some of them might be more economic oriented in terms of, penalties for, not living up to effort or things like that. But really most of the solutions you would find in HR or even in the economics literature as well, right, aren't really economic solutions at all. They're more psychological and sociological, right? So talking about mission statements and commitment, all right, that would be more of a psychological mechanism to get each worker to work as hard as they would have as individuals and sort of overcome the suspicion that others aren't going to work as hard. Peer pressure, strong team norms, right? I'm going to work hard so I don't let down my team, or I'm not ostracized by my team, right? Those would be solutions rooted more in sociological theorizing. The third concern with incentives is when there are multiple tasks. So far we've just been talking about providing incentive for a worker to do one thing. But of course, many jobs involve more than just one thing. And so what happens if we think about incentives in a context where we want workers to do multiple things? Well, instead of there being just one task, let's think about trying to provide an incentive for a worker to do two different types of things. And so to do this, it's useful to go back to the iso-cost and iso-quant diagram that we had earlier in the course. And so here's a reminder of that. On the vertical axis, we have units of high-skilled labor. On the horizontal axis, we have units of low-skilled labor. And we have iso-cost curve in yellow, combinations of high and low skilled labor that yield the same level of cost. And we have an iso-quant for two types of labor that are independent in the production process. And again, the iso-quant gives combinations of high and low skilled labor that gives this same amount of total output or quantity. And so let's think about switching this to an individual level and thinking about two different types of tasks, two different types of effort. And so again, we're just thinking about one worker here, and on the vertical axis, we're going to think about total effort that the worker devotes to one type of task. We'll just call it task A for now. And on the horizontal axis, we have the same thing, but it's for the second task, task B. Right, and so what's going to happen is that the worker might have an incentive or a reward for exerting effort towards A as well as towards B. But remember, in economics, work is assumed to be costly, and so there's a certain marginal cost to effort devoted towards task A and also task B. And so through an economics lens, right, the economically oriented worker wants to optimize their utility, and so they're going to figure out what's the optimal combination in terms of how much effort to spend on task A and how much to spend on task B that is best off for me as an individual, which is going to be a function of the marginal benefit of each form of effort and the marginal cost. So let's think about an example, right? Suppose you're working in a phone store, and we can think in an oversimplified way that there's two different tasks. Right? One task is to sell phones, and so you can decide how much effort to exert selling phones. And the second task is selling plans, and so you can think about how much effort you want to devote to selling plans. And so suppose there's some kind of pay for performance, some kind of incentive, and so each unit of effort, whatever that is, right, it's just an example, each unit of effort selling phones gives you $10, and each unit of effort selling plans yields $15. Right? So it might be tempting to say, well, I just want to sell plans because that's more rewarding, right? But what's that's missing is what about the relative effort? Right? Maybe I just like selling phones, or it's easier for me to sell phones rather than plans, and so we need to factor that into the equation as well. And so let's think about, thinking about what the total effort is, or the effort to each task. And so I'm just going to make something up, and let's just think about it sort of as a stressor unit. Think about how stressful it is to sell phones, how stressful it is to sell plans. You're the type of person that doesn't really like selling plans. You find it pretty boring. It's very tedious, a lot of math, and all the numbers get confused, but you like selling phones. It's sort of cool to play with the different phones and show off the different features and things like that. All right, so we could sort of quantify this in a very sort of homo economicus type way. And let's suppose that each unit of effort selling phones costs us 50 stressor units, whatever the heck that is, and it's 100 stressor units for each unit of effort that we exert trying to sell plans. Again, for us personally, in this example, we don't like selling plans as much, so it's a higher effort cost. So what's the optimal allocation when we have these different monetary benefits, different marginal benefits of the two different types of effort, and different costs of these two different types of effort? Right, this again is an optimization problem. It's similar to what we did with isocost and isoquant, although we're going to flip it around a little bit, and we want to figure out what's the highest benefit we can get for a certain cost rather than the opposite, which is what we did with isocost and isoquant. Okay, so similar to an iso-cost curve, we're going to find something that I'm going to call an iso-income curve. Remember, iso means equal. So combinations of effort on plans and phones that yield the same level of income. And so this is very similar again to an iso-cost curve, right? We could devote 15 units of effort to selling phones and none to plans, and that would give us $150. We could do the opposite. We could devote 10 units of effort to selling plans and 0 to phones. That would also give us $150 in income, or we could do anything in between, right? And we're trading them off at the rate of the relative incentives for the two, which is captured here on this slide. Okay, and just like with isocost and isoquant, we had an isocost, we also need an isoquant. Well, here we have an iso-income, right, which gives us combinations of effort on the two tasks that gives us a certain amount of income. But what about the cost side, right? So I'm going to call this an iso-effort, equal amount of effort, equal amount of stress in this example, similar to an isoquant. So again, I could devote 16 units of effort to selling phones and none to selling plans, and that would result in a total effort cost to me of 800 stressor units. Or I could go down to the other extreme and do all on plans and none on phones, and again still have 800 stressor units, or other combinations in between, all costing me 800 stressor units for that amount of effort. We're trading them off at the relative rates of disutility or marginal cost of effort, similar to what we saw with an isoquant. So now we want to put these two things together and find the highest level of income for the desired total effort level. So again, suppose that I'm thinking about exerting 800 stressor units of effort. What's the most income that I can get for that amount of effort? Well, you can see these two curves cross in the middle. We should be asking ourselves, can you do better? What does it mean to do better in this case? It means, can I increase my income for the same amount of effort? So we want to think about moving the yellow line and holding the red line fixed. And so think about where the optimal point may be. You might want to quickly pause this video, try to draw the new optimal choice. And remember, we're holding the red curve fixed and trying to find the highest amount of income possible for 800 stressor units. So hopefully you drew or are thinking about an outcome like here, and notice that the optimal choice here is to devote 100% of our effort to selling phones and none to selling plans. Right? If we compare the costs and the rewards of phones and plans, I'm better off just selling phones. right, we could reduce this to marginal cost versus marginal benefit, or we could think about it in terms of, right, what are the rewards per unit of stress or per unit of effort, and we can again see that the rewards, factoring in effort costs, greater for phones than for plans, even though it looked like on paper that plans provided more effort, more rewards, because that incentive was higher, right? But we need to factor in the effort cost as well. A common thing you hear in human resources is you get what you pay for, right? This would be an example of you get what you pay for, right? Paid is in quotes because you're not literally paying for this, right? In fact, on paper, again, it looks like you're paying less of an incentive to sell phones than plans, but in fact, from the worker's eyes, right, you're actually paying more effectively for phones, for selling phones than for selling plans, because it's easier, less stressful, less costly for the worker to sell phones rather than plans. So in effect, right, the organization is paying more, providing a stronger incentive for phones, and that's what the organization is getting in return, right? The workers respond to that incentive and devoting more effort to phones rather than plans. So the organization is getting exactly what it paid for, even though on paper it might not look like it. Now there might be a different person, right? Maybe more numbers oriented, or has big fingers and has a hard time operating the keypad on a phone, whatever the case may be, right? There might be a different individual which has a different set of costs. Now the rewards are the same because it's the same store providing the same incentive, but maybe a different individual finds it more costly to themselves to devote effort towards phones, right? And so this would be a new ISO effort curve for that individual, and they are still doing the same optimization problem, trying to find the highest level of income for this fixed effort cost, and that individual would be maximizing their utility by devoting all of their effort to plans rather than phones. And again, the organization is getting what it paid for in terms of how this person is seeing the relative benefits and the relative costs of devoting effort to selling phones and to plans. Okay, this is the opposite of what we found. The picture looks the opposite of what we found when we were doing ISO costs and ISO quants, because from the organization's perspective, when it was looking at the optimal skill ratio, it was trying to find the cheapest way of achieving a desired level of quantity. Here, for an individual, in terms of different allocation of effort, it's trying to find the highest income, maximize income for a fixed level of cost. Okay, however, there might be a lot of cases where an organization doesn't want workers to only be doing one type of task. The university wants me to be doing research as well as teaching. All right, there's lots of examples of that. And so in terms of incentives, notice that if we're not careful, you might be unwittingly incentivizing workers really to devote more effort than the organization wants to one task versus the other, rather than employees responding by having some kind of balance. So how can we think about an organization incentivizing effort on multiple tasks? Well, the textbook says you need to pay equally, and remember, pay means factoring in effort costs, right? So it's not just sort of the sticker price, right? It's not just the $15 or the $10 incentive, but it has to be it has to account for differential effort costs. And if you do that successfully, though, right, there's still no guarantee that a worker might be doing some of both, right? It really becomes more arbitrary. And so, you need to think more carefully if it's really important for the organization to be providing incentives as well as trying to get the worker to do multiple things. Now, if there really isn't a good reason to have one worker do multiple types of things, maybe you just are okay with some workers doing one, some workers doing another, or hire certain workers to sell phones, hire other types of workers to sell plans. Or you might need to come up with more complex incentives than the simple ones that we've been talking about here. Or you need to perhaps reduce your reliance on incentives and bring in other parts of performance as well. So for example, you could have some kind of performance appraisal, right, where a worker knows that they're expected to devote some energy to doing task A and some to task B, and you're going to talk about that in their performance appraisal rather than just rely on these incentives. Now, there's one last interesting example I want to try to present here quickly. Right, remember when we did the isoquants, we started with a straight isoquant, and that's where the high-skilled and low-skilled labor were working independently, and so we were trading them off at the same rate. Well, we could think of a similar thing here with multiple tasks. Right, when we have a straight line iso-effort cost, that's assumed, right, that's embedded in that is an assumption that you're trading them off in terms of effort costs at the same rate, no matter whether you're doing a lot of one or a lot of the other, right? So you don't really care. That's assuming they don't really care if you're just doing all of one or all of another, right? But there might be but task variety is a well-known HR thing, right? You might be bored doing the same thing over and over, and some people might like to do multiple things, right? Might like to juggle multiple tasks. And so let's think about how we can add that in here. Right, so here's our iso-effort curve, which is a straight line. What happens if we have task variety, which reduces effort costs at certain points along here? Okay, so if we have task variety, that means either extreme here, where we're doing almost all on one task or almost all on the other task, right? Those are relatively more costly to us than in the middle, where we have sort of offsetting benefits, intrinsic benefits or whatever, because of task variety. So remember, this red line is meant to capture total level of effort costs being the same across all different combinations of effort being devoted to A and B. But if there's task variety, then things are more costly at either extreme. And so in order to hold total cost constant along this curve, right, we need to actually have less total effort when we're in each extreme compared to when we're in the middle. And so what's going to happen is this curve is going to bend when we have task variety. So again, remember, this curve is going to capture total level of effort. It's going to hold total level of effort constant among combinations of effort devoted to A and B. And so in order to do that, if there's sort of an extra pain cost from being bored or whatever, when we're doing almost all of A or almost all of B, then we're going to have to do less than before in those regions in order to give us the same total effort as when we're doing a more balanced combination somewhere in the middle. And so we're back here to trying to figure out what's the optimal allocation across the two. And you can think about drawing the optimal choice. Pause the video if you need to, and hopefully think about something like this, right? And the optimal choice is going to be somewhere in the middle. That's going to be where the marginal benefit of the two equal the marginal cost of the two, right? And because extreme effort just on A or just on B is more costly, it's going to be most effective for the individual to choose something in the middle. And so when you're trying to incentivize an economically oriented worker and you expect them to do more than one task, pay close attention not only to the rewards you're paying, but also to the effort costs as perceived by the individuals. And remember that the organization is going to get what it pays for. And so if there isn't task variety, then workers might be pushing their effort all towards the type of task that they find relatively more rewarding. However, task variety can work in your favor, and that might push even economically oriented workers towards having a more balanced approach to the tasks that they're doing. Please make sure you understand all three of these concerns, including the graphs. After all, they might be on a test. As always, if you're confused, please don't hesitate to ask for help.